thank you very much for your attendance, and as is the custom at ANU for major events, I'd like to express our acknowledgement and celebration of the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and also to pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past and present. It's a great pleasure to welcome you not only to this seminar, but hopefully many of you will also be attending other events in this week to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Indonesian project, which is an extraordinary achievement. And to help us to celebrate this event, we have two very dear friends of the Indonesian project, a long history with the project, who have come to help us mark the occasion. One of them is Khatib Basri, Debbie, who will be speaking from memory tomorrow night. May not have memorised all of the events. This afternoon, okay, today, correct today. And of course, on this occasion, we have Ibu Professor Mari Pangestu, and Ibu Mari has a very long association with the Indonesian project. She first came to Canberra in the mid-60s when her father was, we think, perhaps the first Indonesian appointment to the Indonesia project. And so she did much of her schooling in Canberra, and then she did her bachelor and her master's degrees at ANU before going on and completing her PhD at the University of California in Davis. She then went on to be a senior CSIS scholar, and of course Minister for Trade and later Minister for Tourism and Creative Economy. So she served throughout the 10 years of the Yudhoyono presidency. We've seen her many times, of course, at ANU, and she always gives wonderful talks, and they always draw a very large crowd. And so we're very pleased on this occasion to welcome Bu Mari back again to speak to us about challenges ahead for growth, development and competitiveness. And I should just add that Bu Mari, since she left Cabinet, has taken up a position as Professor of International Economics at the University of Indonesia. So a warm welcome to Ibu Mari.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's always a great pleasure to be back at my kampung, Canberra, back at ANU. It's always a welcome home, and I think today, on this trip, maybe because I had 50 years of Indonesia project in my mind, as I landed at the Canberra airport, I had this flashback of arriving here in 1966, when the airport was just two hangars like this. And the rest is history. I guess I feel like I wouldn't be the person I am today if I had not come to Canberra and spent some of my schooling here. When I was asked to speak to the Indonesia study group, they asked me, they were pestering me for a topic. So I chose this topic because it means I can talk about anything I want. So it's wide enough to talk about anything that I wanted, because I couldn't really, I thought hard about what would be of interest to an audience like this. And so I ended up, what I'm going to present today is a little bit of update on recent developments. And then the second half of the talk, I would like to put a list of issues, I guess, about what Indonesian economic policy should be in the immediate short term to respond to the immediate challenges, and the medium term. And it will be like a list of issues just to open up the discussion. And I hope that it will be provocative enough to generate discussion. So let's start with recent developments. I think, not surprisingly, the growth is falling since 2013. This is a trend that is not just unique to Indonesia, obviously, but also being played out in many other countries in the world. And in the case of Indonesia, because, as we will see shortly, a lot of the growth decline is related to the decline in commodity prices and commodity demand, it has a regional impact also. So the story of the 2004 to 2011 was a lot of it export-driven commodity boom, and outside of Java was booming. And you can see it in all the indicators of growth. But now on the downside, obviously, there's a greater slowdown in outer Java as well, as you have a decline in the commodity prices. And the weaker GDP growth is related to, for the first time, a decline in consumption and a lack of robustness in investment, as well as government spending. Okay, and that's really part of the recent story that we have to understand if we want to understand how is Indonesia going to deal with the short-term slowdown and the more important question about medium-term structural change. So how does Indonesia fare? This comes from the World Bank, most recent World Bank quarterly report. The slowdown is being played out across all countries. And the bar is how the average growth of countries in the last 10 years. And then the 2015-2016 are the blue bars. So we are not so far below our average from the last 10 years compared to, say, China or Brazil. You know, this is kind of the emerging country slowdown story that is being played out across the world. And India is obviously still the one doing better. So actually India and Indonesia as emerging economies are doing much better than China, Turkey, Brazil. Remember the BRICS? Russia. I guess we dare not mention BRICS anymore. So Indonesia is slowing down, but it's not doing as badly as some of the other countries, if that's any comfort. This graph actually comes from the article that I did for the BIES in the upcoming 50 years anniversary volume. For 50 years, slowdown in growth. Let's break it down to the external story, consumption, investment, and government expenditure. So the trade story, which is it feels like deja vu. You keep on playing the same record. So we are back to the third time, I think, in the 50 years. Export diversification from commodities story, right? So in the last 50 years, Indonesia always had a balance of trade surplus, except for the last 3 years, 2012 to 2014. That's how badly things fell, and partly because of the import. Part of the deficit is due to the import of oil. You know, we became a net importer of oil sometime a few years ago. So this is the trend for trade, and you can see that this is the most 2012 to 2015. You can see that exports is really slowing down, and imports is slowing down even faster. Yeah, and that is the reason why you have a trade surplus in 2015, but that's only because imports are falling faster than exports. Why? One reason is the fall in oil prices. The second most worrying reason is that investment is slowing down. So the import of intermediate goods, capital goods are falling. Okay, this is this is the most recent BIS numbers showing the slowdown in exports in semester 1 of 2015 is a decline of 11.86. In the last, since 2012 to 2014, it was about 5 or 6%. So we've been declining every year in our exports. A lot of that has to do with China. Okay, I think Australia knows this story very well because Australia is experiencing the same thing. This is just exports by sector. These are not very accurate numbers, but they look too detailed. But I just want you to focus on the one that has delta, which shows that everything is negative. So all the exports by destination is negative. And look at China. Sorry, this is in Indonesian, but Tiongkok is China, minus 26% decline in growth in January, June 2015. So, as we all know, China is slowing down. China is expected to grow below 7% this year. Oh, okay. But everything else is slowing down. Europe, I think the only positive one here is India. which is interesting because India, I guess, is faring better than. Sorry, I was told never to put a table or a graph with so many numbers, but on the good side, everything is also negative again, whether you're talking about CPO or all the minerals. Okay, that's the export story. External story, since 2012, decline. And I don't think the external demand situation is going to look any better in the short term. If you look at the IMF projections, slow growth for the world for the next 5 years. And China is a very important factor in there, and Indonesia, obviously, as we have just seen, relies a lot on China. So part of the other thing that's happened is, our rupiah has depreciated by, I think it's about 12% in the last 18 months, but no impact on exports. In other situations when the rupiah has weakened, you have an upside on the export, but there is none of that. So that's the external story. So in the short term and medium term for growth, what does that mean? We'll talk about that later. But consumer confidence is the other part of growth. In the past, in the 2009 crisis, we managed to grow at 4.9% because consumer demand continued to be robust. Now, the last year, we can see consumer confidence really declining, as well as investor confidence. And this is really one of the most worrying things about the short-term outlook for Indonesia. Employment, you can see that employment growth has also declined. Part of it is due to the commodity. You can see this story shows you how important the commodity boom was to Outer Java and also to Indonesia in general. So post-commodity boom, again, the diversification story is really one of the most important structural questions that we have to ask. This is another number. I think maybe Chris's presentation yesterday maybe talked a little bit about this, about potential for unemployment rising, and we are already hearing about layoffs. Numbers which I don't show here, but every time in the last few months when I meet business people, I will always ask them, so what's happening in your sector? What's happening to your sales and so on? And almost every answer is that it's falling, right? About 30–40% fall, including cigarettes, okay? Maybe for those of us who are pro banning cigarettes for health reasons, we welcome that. But cigarettes is, if you talk about the lower level of consumption, cigarettes, even in the 98 crisis, cigarette sales still went up 6%. This time around, cigarette sales are down, and we have heard from Jarum that they are reducing the number of people they're employing. And the other thing that's fallen is noodles, instant noodles. Okay, instant noodle sales are down. Okay? And that's worrying because it's a reflection of the lower percentile of consumption. When I was talking to, trying to compare 98 and now, why did cigarette sales go down? And the answer is a little bit interesting, but a little bit worrying. When you have to reduce your consumption, you choose, right? What do you reduce? And apparently they reduced cigarette consumption, but they didn't reduce the purchase of pulsa for their headphone. So that has become a much more of a necessity, whether it's for communication, maybe it's also for work, yeah? So this I think was an interesting phenomenon. And the other thing that was interesting comparing the crisis of 98 and now, I was talking to some Bank Rakyat Indonesia people, and they said during the monetary crisis in 98, actually the small and micro enterprises, they actually survived the crisis, and they continue to grow, maybe because they were at that time, they were not reliant on banks, right? This time round, they're beginning to see a lot of the micro enterprises having problems. Okay, so I think these are some of the kind of worrying numbers from the ground, apart from the macro picture. This is just a picture of how much the rupiah has depreciated and how much the stock market has fallen. And obviously this is the same trend being played out in other countries. But this is important to note when we think about what are the policy options for Indonesia in the short term in managing the macro, and then of course we talk about the structural changes that need to be done. And again, I just want to emphasize that BI was somewhat criticized before 2013 because they were maintaining the rupiah stronger than what it should be, and that was thought to be reducing the competitiveness of our exports. And they began to allow the rupiah to depreciate more in 2013. In 2013, we actually still had an impact on the exports. But 2014 onwards, no impact, not much impact on exports from the weakening of rupiah. I think it's because the external, it's not so much about supply constraint, but I think it's more about demand. The external demand has just fallen so much that you don't get that effect anymore. Okay, so that was, in very, very brief, what is the situation in Indonesia today. So this is the trendy word to use, the new normal, right? After the 2009 fiscal stimulus, there's a new normal for everyone, whether it's China, whether it's Indonesia, or whether it's the world. So the new normal is that slower growth in the near term, and all these IMF, World Bank, global projections are all showing a slowdown globally for various reasons. Europe, of course, because it still has its internal problems. Japan is also not recovering. The only good story apparently is the US. And China definitely, there's a lot of discussion, debate. As China undertakes its structural reforms, it's going to go to a new lower growth. How long will it take? What are the disruptions that's going to happen? We can see all the discussion about what's happening in the stock market, and so on. And of course, Indonesia has its own domestic challenges. We cannot hope for easy money anymore, and the tapering off that will happen with the US of the quantitative easing is coming. It keeps on being coming. In 2013, we already had seen the impact, and it will come. And that means that the room for you to reduce your interest rate, if you're intending to use monetary policy to stimulate your economy, is somewhat limited until that story settles down. Weak rupiah, no boost to exports. So fiscal stimulus is limited. I'll say a little bit more about that. So you are left to increasing your productivity. You cannot rely on factor accumulation like what China is doing now. They know they cannot really rely on factor accumulation for growth. It has to be, again, addressing how to increase productivity and innovation. Low commodity prices are here to stay. This is structural, it's not a business cycle phenomena. So again, we are facing the question we faced in the 80s, and perhaps if you look at in 50 years of BIS, and you read it carefully, you'll see this theme being played out again and again, and maybe this is the third time that we are seeing the same question being asked. And obviously, the 60s and the 80s are different from today, where we do have a more diversified economy and more modern economy, more diversified structure. But yet still, we can see earlier on in the presentation that commodity boom decline had a major impact, has had a major impact on Indonesia. In China slowing down and structural reforms that they're doing, there's also an opportunity. Okay, as China apparently leaves its labor-intensive exports, is there room for other countries to enter into that space, like Indonesia? I mean, definitely Vietnam, Cambodia, and other countries are already entering into this space. And I think we also have to watch for where is China going next, because in this whole global value chain world of trade, where China is going to go. At the moment, China on the manufacturing side has become the hub. and we are kind of part of that hub. Some of us, actually, if you look at the numbers, Indonesia is not so much part of that manufacturing hub for the electronic products. But now they are purportedly wanting to pursue innovation-driven growth and services. Even though we don't quite know whether this is going to be successful or not, but that's the direction they're going, value-added and so on. And it would be a mistake for countries like Indonesia not to pay attention to that, because how do we fit in? Service, global value chain, we normally in the old traditional way of looking at it, is just manufacturing components and parts of machinery, and then you assemble it somewhere. It's no longer that. The services that are embedded in that global value chain, which China is entering into this huge space, is something we have to watch out for. I think the other thing is the changing ways of doing trade. We remember flying geese, remember production networks, and then we went into global value chain. Unfortunately, I didn't bring my nice pictures in this presentation. The iPod example is an interesting one, where the value added of an iPod, if you look at traditional statistics, it looks like part of the US deficit with China is because of this export of iPods, iPads that are being assembled in China. But actually the value added is only $6. A lot of the inputs are coming from Japan, Korea, Europe. And of course the IP itself, the intellectual property right of the brand Apple, is mainly from the US, right? So this is something which is very important to understand for a country like Indonesia. And there's some work that are being done that shows that there's a lower relationship between trade and growth when you just look at trade in goods. There's a study by Aditya Mathu recently that came out, and then I just read an article written by UBS from China. The reason why is there's a maturation of the global value chain. There's more being produced in China. They don't import from a lot of other countries, because a lot of it is being produced in China. And the numbers show that this is happening. So in other words, the limits of global value chain in manufacturing, there are limits to the global value chain in manufacturing. So the next big thing is actually, should be in services. The other things that we have to look at in the medium term for Indonesia and the region is the types of goods and services demanded and supplied are going to be affected by growing purchasing power, growing concern about sustainable development, lifestyle, demographics. Southeast Asia and India have young population, Northeast Asia have aging population. Middle class, there's going to be changes in the growth poles, and urbanization. Okay, so these are all kind of short-term and medium-term challenges of new normal for Indonesian development. I'm summarizing a lot, obviously. You can probe and ask me questions, so we can open it up for discussion later. Okay, now let's talk about policy responses. Again, this is going to be a little bit like a menu. I'll try to highlight some of the things that are happening and some of the things that should be happening, that we would like to see happen, put it that way, in terms of good policy. So what has happened, what has been the response of the government, in the short term? Okay, let's start with monetary policy, which is the easier one. The central bank, as you know, is independent. They have reduced the interest rate and then increased the interest rate again when we had some capital outflows. And now I think it's likely that the interest rate will remain until we know what's going to happen with the US interest rate hike. So there's limited space to stimulate the economy from monetary policy. What they are doing, because they can't use the interest rate, is to use relax reserve requirement, reduce the deposit requirement for consumer and property purchases. So they're trying to stimulate demand from that side. But given the slowdown in consumption and so on, it doesn't seem to have much impact. There are some numbers showing some increase in non-performing loans. So some of the things to worry on the financial sector are related to the possibility of increasing non-performing loan as you slow down exposure to foreign debt. These are some of the kind of financial sector issues. On the fiscal part, so in other words, in terms of government macro instrument, really what you should be focusing on is how to make sure you have the fiscal policy work for you as much as possible. And herein lies some of the issues of the last 12 months. First issue is, let's start with the expenditure side. The fuel subsidy was removed to make room for greater spending on infrastructure and also on some of the social welfare spending. But what happened was it has been slow to be dispersed for probably two reasons. One reason is, I think there are 8 government ministries that were restructured during with the new government, I think 7 or 8. And the moment you restructure a government ministry, you have to go through a whole process before you can disperse the budget. You know, you have to change there's this famous, I didn't know this before I became a minister, there's this thing called nomenclature. Does that translate into English? Nomenclature. So each budget item has a specific number and a specific name. The moment you change one word in that, you have to go through a whole process, okay? I had to go through this 2 times as a minister. I had to basically create new ministry. So it takes a whole year, basically, to restructure in terms of the civil service and then the budget and so on and so forth. So I think that's part of the reason why expenditure has been a bit slow to be dispersed. And I think the second reason is just new government, new learning what should be the priority, and some new programs like the village law, which is a new program. We are supposed to be dispersing under the new village law that was passed in 2014. I think it's 1.3 or 1.4 billion rupiah per village, 70,000 villages were supposedly documented in 2014 when that law was passed. I was told, you can guess, moral hazard issue, there are now about 80,000 villages. Maybe it'll continue to increase. And I don't think they have enough to spend, not 1.4, I think it's 500 million that they're spending. And then you have the education for all, health for all program, and cash for work. So you still have another 5 months to undertake the spending. I think capital expenditure will be hard to spend just because it takes too long to spend. But the focus should be on stimulating domestic consumption, especially to stimulate the lower level income group. So all this actually, if you can make it work to the best possible way, might have some impact. And certainly for next year, that should be one of the focus, because as I said, consumer expenditure is down, and if you have increased unemployment, that's going to affect purchasing power and so on. Now, on the other side of it, the revenue target was set at, a lot of people feel that this is unrealistic, to set a revenue tax target of 39% increase during a slowdown and with all the changes that are happening. So the tax policy, a lot of the tax policies that have been passed in the last few months have been focused on achieving revenue target in a time when you've got slowdown in the economy. So maybe this is, maybe there should be a relook at this, because it's the only instrument you have in the macro side is the fiscal policy. You need a accommodative fiscal policy when you have a slowdown. So I think these are just some of the catatan or notes about macro policy. How about investment? Because investment has been slowing down also. How do you manage longer term flows to help you in your restructuring, as well as manage short term capital outflows or inflows? The government has been very focused on something which has been also the program of the last government, the famous one-stop service for investment, okay, in the Board of Investment, to make it really, really one-stop. And I think it's partially working, but it remains to be seen whether this new service can really be delivered and whether it will really help the investment. And this needs to also be happening in the regions, because I think a lot of the issues faced by investors, they face in the regions. Infrastructure, again, one of the big issues for growth is to get infrastructure going, both to generate growth, as well as, we all know this is the issue, big issue for competitiveness and efficiency. I think once again the problem is coordination. Where is the focal point for the infrastructure projects? That's still kind of happening. I think it's still not clear where it would be. And project readiness for the private sector participation. Again, still work in progress. So my own view on this is that, of course, we want to prioritize infrastructure. It's still the big thing, but it's going to take time, including the land issues that we are facing. I guess the Indonesia update this year is on land management, right? So I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion on that. That's still one of the big issues. So my view on this is that while we are working on this big vision on infrastructure, there's a lot that you can do to improve existing infrastructure. And the dwelling time of goods in ports, that's been an ongoing issue for so many years. It requires you to actually improve the management of the ports. Single port authority is there on paper, okay? Now, how to make that really happen in reality, okay? That requires the state-owned enterprises with the port authorities and so on to really agree with some, I think, political will from the top. If you followed the news, Jokowi did go to Tanjung Priok and he marahin semua orang, scolded everybody, said, I'm going to fire all of you if you cannot reduce the dwelling time, because I think he went there a few months ago and it was, nothing had changed. But you really need to have, as we said, somebody yang nongkrongin. Yeah? Somebody has to be there to really see it through. Yeah? And things like single window for documentation services. I was told that's something we started back in 2006 as part of our ASEAN commitment. And I was told this is, again, one of the things that has fallen by the side. So things, facilitation. The big topic for the trade people is trade facilitation. You can actually achieve a lot on that count if you just sat down and really try to make it happen. And of course, avoiding mixed signals, making sure you have consistency in your policy. Again, let's just say teething problems of new government. Let's hope that this will be, we can discuss this a little bit more in question and answer, because there's a number of issues in there. So you need to have, if you want to grow according to the government target of 7% by 2019, you have to have deep reforms. Now, what are the kind of reforms that we need? Okay, now we enter into the medium term. I'm just giving you a list of topics. If you look at what's purported on paper currently, when we talk about structural change and competitiveness, it tends to be they don't call it this, but I kind of call it this. It seems like it's kind of a sectoral approach, and it's all about reducing imports. Okay, you have a balance of trade deficit, you have a current account deficit. So the approach is, let's reduce imports, let's have more being produced domestically. That's one reaction. There is some talk about labor-intensive production and trying to attract relocation from China and so on, and manufacturing needs to be boosted. So we know that here the reforms that have to happen are infrastructure, labor, and the investment climate. There's a lot of talk about deepening the industrial structure, okay? Industrial tree approach. We want to produce end-to-end in Indonesia. We want to have domestic content. We want to have value-add upstream and downstream. These are some of the language, and import substitution, by the way, has come back. Yes, it has. It's actually part of the policy. Board of Investment, one of their priorities is to look for investments in import substitution. Agriculture, the buzzword is self-sufficiency. Okay, it's not food security, it's self-sufficiency. And that relates to a lot of it has to do more with the import side. We hear we don't hear too much about what they intend to do in terms of increasing production, although that obviously must be a part of it. And there's a lot of talk about the need for domestic companies, including state-owned enterprises. Okay, this is kind of, if you look at some of the policies, the idea of having the balance with foreign participation and making sure there's domestic benefits, etc., etc., and increasing the domestic participation includes the state-owned enterprises. But it tends to be translated into foreign ownership limits, restrictions on foreign workers, rather than thinking about, okay, what is it that we need to do to have quality foreign investment and getting the benefit out of the foreign investment. So, in other words, I think what is needed is, probably I'm jumping a little bit here. I think I left out one point here. Basically, there is no clear idea about how to undertake medium-term structural change. Okay, and what should be done is a more comprehensive approach, which tries to get at where's the world going, this global value chain that has services embedded in it. We have to have efficient services if we're going to have efficient manufacturing and competitiveness. That's kind of where we need to go. And this comes from Gas Papanek and Raden Padede's presentation, which when they talk about, I think labor-intensive manufacturers is still a potential for Indonesia, and it requires you to address inefficiency in infrastructure, labor reforms, and how to be part of the production network and the global value chain, where you need to really make sure services is included in there. And there's a lot of talk about agglomeration and industrial clusters. And there's actually a lot of relocation going to Central Java and Eastern Java from Banten and Tangerang, because Banten and Tangerang have had the most labor problems. Now, whether it moves off Java, if you remember the first slide, there's slow growth off Java. And part of the government priority is to move things off Java. But we all know how difficult that is when you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the labor, you don't have the supporting industries. You can't create industrial clusters outside of Java, much as you would like to. So for instance, wanting to have a smelter in Papua compared to East Java, let's figure out the cost and benefit of that. So this is again, Eastern Indonesia. What do you do with the development of Eastern Indonesia? Okay, value added in the new economy and the global value chain is about competitiveness and where you are in that value chain. And it's not just about trade in goods, but the trade people like to say trade in tasks rather than trade in goods. So it's the task of designing, for instance. And designing means the creative workers that can design, but it also means you've got to have the software and the hardware that go with the design world, and having the ICT technology to enable you to download very fast and very cheaply the data you need and to send it out. So it's the task that you should focus on to see how you can make sure that there is a flow of goods, services, people that can happen. So infrastructure, for competitiveness, you need to focus on the infrastructure, and it's not just the physical, but also the soft. Access to internationally competitive inputs and technology, and a conducive ecosystem, including intellectual property rights and so on. It's not about import substitution versus export orientation, or downstreaming or value adding, or domestic content or self-sufficiency. It's about where are you going to be competitive. So this structural reform and infrastructure building needs to continue, and you need to be aware of this whole new economy, this digital world that's out there, that even if you try to restrict many things, technology is going to just overcome all these restrictions anyway. So you have to know what's happening. Something like e-commerce is something that's very, very new in Indonesia. is the estimate that it's only like 1% of our retail sales is being conducted by e-commerce. But I think there's a lot of unrecorded that's happening. And in Indonesia, the numbers show that I think 70% of the online sales are being done through social media. Okay, and it's not through the banking system. You're paying by transfer, cash transfer. So, but this is going to be a whole new world that's going to be developing, and that's part of the creative economy. It's part of the IT world that the government, I think, is not They actually, I think it's a mixed picture. They don't actually understand the economic significance of this, but they understand it as a tool for governance. I mean, especially Jakarta government. You know, all the meetings of the Jakarta government is posted on YouTube. Every single meeting, so it's very full transparency, full disclosure, right? And e-government seems to be coming out. But on the other side, because they're coming out with the e-commerce regulations, which some of us are a little bit afraid that this may be too restrictive, that you kill the goose before it can lay the golden egg. So we have to respond to the new economy challenges and the creative economy as a new source of growth and competitiveness. And this needs a conducive ecosystem for small startups, for intellectual property rights, for innovation, and so on. This is just a suggestion, because if we say, for us to be competitive, let's forget about domestic content and import substitution. That isn't going to fly politically, right? So what should we be talking about? We make everything open. That may also be difficult to sell. So to become competitive and undertake the structural change, let's focus on human capital as the new national interest. Because governments are bad at picking winners, sectors. And if you look at the slide that shows the sectoral approach, a lot of it is picking winners. And losers, as we know, are certainly good at picking government. Different types of industrial policy should not focus on sector or outcome, but on the input side. Okay, facilitation, incentives, training, and so on. So this is just coming from experience as to how can we sell this deep structural reform agenda, keeping openness agenda. You know, I think we need to think carefully. I'm just suggesting one possible approach. It may not be the only possible approach. But at the end of the day, if you can translate it to national benefits, even better if you can say Sulawesi is going to benefit, Sumatra is going to benefit in this way, this many jobs are going to be created, that's even better. But we know, final point, I think there's not much focus on services. And services, even though it's a growing portion of employment output of Indonesia, it's still the lower end services. It's your trade, wholesale trade, and so on. We need, although increasingly, some of the higher end services. But you need to have efficient services sector for job creation. I think Chris's paper, if I'm not mistaken, makes that conclusion. And we can see that this is the new area for Indonesia. But it needs to be accompanied by open trade and investment and the necessary regulations. Okay, so this is really, GVC is the answer, but we need to understand where we need to be. Services need to be developed, and I think creative economy is also another area where it can be potential for growth and competitiveness. I'm sorry if I'm kind of rambling, but just give you a menu of issues. And I think there's a lot of homework to be done when we talk about the kind of policies that are needed in the medium term. But we have to be smart about it. I think Hal has written a paper called Smart Industrial Policy. So we have to be, we can call it industrial policy, but we need to be smart about it. And the final thing I would say is that a lot of things that you want to do, like domestic content and all this, you'll find that you can't really do it either because it's hitting against some of your international commitment, or it's just not practical to do it. and the businesses are not going to respond in the way you think they're going to respond. So there's a lot of learning to be done, and I hope we can. This should be. I think there are 10 research topics in there for you to think about what is the structural reform policy for Indonesia in the next 5-10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bumari. My apologies for the on and off lighting. As far as I know, it's not an ANU budget saving measure. We actually lecture a lot in this room, and it's the first time it's ever happened before. But I hope you could see enough to take notes for those of you who are doing that. Now, we open the floor to questions and comments, please. Yes.
Thank you for a very interesting seminar. The story this afternoon that we heard, it seems like we're going back into the inward looking strategy with the import substitution as well as the self-sufficiency in agriculture. And in contrast with that opportunity that you mentioned in the global value chain, I wonder what is it realistically that we could do given the current educational qualification and skills in Indonesia? What is it specifically that we could be part of this global value chain opportunity that is currently exists?
Yes.
So your question is which part of the global value chain we can participate in? Actually, there's already a lot happening. In the whole world of offshoring and outsourcing. A lot of things are happening. I mean, we have the normal offshoring and outsourcing in the labor-intensive manufacturing, such as in garments, footwear, and so on. But we're also seeing a growth, and I really don't have the numbers because we just don't have the numbers on outsourcing in services. Okay, and we, for instance, outsourcing in animation. A lot of there are at least 30 or 40 companies in Indonesia who are already doing outsourcing for animation. And in animation, you also see a value chain and a production process where the highest value is in Hollywood because they are the ones who come up with still have the IP on the character, right? The IP is kind of the highest value for it. And then you have the actual production of it, which is the lowest part of the value chain. And a lot of that is being done in Indonesia, all right? So if you watch Garfield or Peter Rabbit or all these animation, a lot of that is actually being produced in Indonesia. So Korea was doing that 10 years ago. Now it's moved to Indonesia. Korea is already going into the medium value chain of that and also beginning to go into the higher value chain, which is the IP itself, creating characters. Indonesia is moving in that direction, trying to come up with their own IP. And it's in the creative industries, you will see it in animation, comics, okay? I think it's the artistic ability, okay? If you compare offshoring and outsourcing between India and Indonesia, in India you will find all the software and the call centers. Indonesia is not so much into that, even though Indonesians are supposed to be very good at coding. You know, all the guys and gals who win the hacking competition, a lot of them are Indonesians. And then they get hired by Google or by Yahoo or whatever. Yeah. And also in design, like graphic design and architecture, interior. There's an Australian web platform called Web99. And it's a platform for making logos for companies, and you compete. You know, as a designer, you go and compete if a company wants a logo, and then if you win, you get paid $200 or $300. I use this example in my Crawford lecture, and Indonesia supplies 16% for this website, and there are like now a few thousand villages around Indonesia who are supplying these designs, and they've doubled their income, tripled their income, because they still work as farmers during the day or whatever profession they have, and at night they design these logos. So the IT world and connectivity has opened up a whole range of possibility, which addresses the inclusion agenda. It addresses the kind of regional disparity, but we just don't quite know where it's going. And I think there's a lot of potential there. One of the biggest obstacles is actually the ICT connectivity. We have very slow broadband and still very expensive. So you can't do the huge data work. If you could solve that, I think Indonesia would have a good chance to be participating in that part of the global chain. That's some of the examples. There are many other examples, but I'm just trying to give you an insight to something which we don't normally talk about when we talk about production networks and global value chains.
Next question, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Very interested in your discussions of global value chains, and I think the previous questioner has already put a finger on that economic nationalism and global value chains don't sit easily together. But what you just said about connectivity and broadband, and you said earlier, connectivity and infrastructure is not just big new ports and airports, making them work better, using IT intelligently. It's very important. I think fixing up the speed of broadband is a lot cheaper than the fixing up the infrastructure or physical infrastructure. You ended with human resources as being the next big impact. I'd like to ask you, what's the thinking in Indonesia about using information technology much more innovatively to transform the education sector, especially higher education?
Okay, back to global value chains and nationalism. That you're right. That's exactly where the tension lies. And I think we need to. Our homework is cut out for us in terms of trying to make sure that the policymakers understand that it kind of. I'm just a little bit afraid when you start explaining global value chain. They'll want everything. They want the whole value chain in their country, right? That tends to be the kind of knee-jerk reaction. Whereas the world today, even the way the business model has changed totally. They have all these words like shared economy, what else? Co-creation. When you don't create yourself, but when you co-create, you collaborate, you get a much higher value added than you would if you just creating by yourself. And there's all this, even in like if you look at growth theory, endogenizing that into growth. There's a whole body of literature there, and that's the main message that we try to explain, that if you can be part of the global chain or and you can also graduate in that value chain, and in fact you can leapfrog. That's the other thing, right? You don't have to go like in the traditional production network. You can actually leap. Yeah. And these are the things that we need to explain better. And for that to happen, you need the talent and the human resources. You need the connectivity, the infrastructure, physical and ICT. Now on human resources, this is where I think, again, can we take an open view on the need to build human capital, including inviting foreign talent to come to your country, to develop the talent in your country, or even to make your country the hub for something, whether it's film, music, or whatever. And it can only happen if you because of co-creation, collaboration, if you allow foreign talent to come into your country. But the tendency at the moment is still, no, we limit foreign talent. And we also don't like our talent to be brain drain. We don't like our talent to move off Indonesia. Whereas again, if you see the diaspora of India, how they've developed the IT in India, I mean, it's kind of you actually see that happening in Indonesia. A lot of the animation, games, and all these creative industries, a lot of them have been started by young people who have had some experience working in Hollywood or elsewhere, and then they decide to come home. And they start with because of their connections and network, they start with the OEM, with the offshoring. Before then, they start in the next stage. They're entering now into the next stage of trying to create their own IP. So I think human resources is going to be key, especially when you talk about innovation, increasing productivity, innovation, and creativity. It's the main input are the people, right? So you have to focus on education, the right type of education, and whether an IT, education in IT, whether it's the skills of using the IT, or using IT as a means, as a tool for education. Now there is actually a whole program on e-books, okay? Some target about having coverage of e-books by a certain year. And e-books we count as part of the creative industry. So when we talk to the e-books producers, they said, at least on this one, we are competitive because no foreign company has actually entered into this space because of language, because of content, and so on. But I think if you have a large enough market, I'm sure it's going to attract also foreign companies. It doesn't have to be bad, as you can actually develop it. So there's a whole range of discussion about e-books, and obviously laptop per person, or laptop per child kind of program. Tablet per child, I should say. Laptop is too expensive. So Indonesian-made tablets are now running at about 1 million rupiah, which is slightly less than $100. Getting cheaper, yeah. So it may happen yet, but then the problem is the teacher, right? The teachers have to know how to it's a tool. It's not, it's not a magic formula. When you get an iPad or a tablet, you're going to be all of a sudden smart. How you use it and the content and so on. So I think it's still a huge problem, but obviously it's an important one.
Question.
Follow on from Andrew's question and ask you about logistics. I don't think anyone in Indonesia has tried harder than you have to push on logistics in your time as minister, but obviously it was frustrating. We have a Ministry of Trade, we don't have a Ministry of Logistics as such. I'm a little concerned that clearly there's a hard infrastructure problem, and it does need a lot of money to fix a lot of things. On the other hand, as Andrew was suggesting, it's not just a hard infrastructure problem. There's a lot of soft infrastructure issues, and there's a lot of issues within government itself, a lot of institutional issues, which are probably as much causes of high costs. I just don't think Kapanek and Padede are right. You can't do everything in government. It simply isn't possible. Nice idea. So would you like to comment on that? What do you see as some of the real obstacles towards progress with reducing logistics costs in Indonesia? Thank you.
Political commitment and coordination. Okay, the political commitment is there, but maybe an understanding of a comprehensive approach that was needed. I mean, we spent almost 2 years, at least myself and the Ministry of Finance and to some extent Transportation, trying to come up with this famous blueprint for logistics reform, where you have to understand that to solve the logistics problem, it's not the Ministry of Transportation, it's not the Ministry of Trade or Ministry of Trade, it's the whole, it's like 6 or 7 main ministries. And they have to see the same, they have to work from the same blueprint. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, right? But the World Bank just finished a study on inter-island logistics, and they found that out of the 100% cost of logistics, only 10% is actually the shipping cost, the inter-island shipping cost. 90% is the online cost and the delays and the warehouse cost that you have to pay more, the demurrage cost, 90%, right? So unless you can have a connectivity land and sea or even air in some instances, it just doesn't work because it has to be smooth flow, yeah, on the physical side. Then you have to have all the facilitation policies to, whether it's the customs, whether it's the inter-island restrictions, or even inter-provincial restrictions. All that adds up. So, you know, in our framework, there were 6 parts to it. Part of it was physical, the other part of it was regulatory, and the final part was human resources. You've got to have the human resources trained. They found that our single window is not working on the single port authority because the workers, the union of the wharf workers, is that what you call them? The people who work on the wharf, they don't want to lose their control because they are the ones who take the goods off and on, and then the cranes, whether the cranes work or not, you know. So there has to be a comprehensive approach, even to the extent of how you manage the port and make sure there's incentive for these workers to want to comply. You know, why should I give better service? You know, I don't get any incentive for giving better service. You know, that kind of thing. So I think coordination needs to happen. There has to be. My experience in government tells me that you have to assign. It can be any one of the 6 involved ministers, but probably finance minister may be the most powerful one because they do have the infrastructure. One of them has to be given the coordination responsibility for making sure that all the dots connect. You know, and I think there was an added component recently. Use of Indonesian made ships. It's come back again. So Indonesian made ships. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see they'll find that it's not practical.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm ARBC, Judy Anderson, and also work for IBM and Indonesia. We're finding increasing the local content requirements in the laws quite restrictive. And from what you were saying, you're saying that you can present the arguments as though so that the local content restrictions are actually going to inhibit our ability to expand in the country and develop skills and new jobs. Is that the main theme of your argument? Are there other aspects that we should also include in our comments back to the government about those restrictions?
I think what you should do with local content is, yes, one aspect is that it limits the ability to expand. The second would be that local content is much greater than the components that go into a computer or a handphone. There's a lot of software, creativity, design that goes into a product. So don't just focus on that. You know, one of the ongoing ones that I followed quite closely is BlackBerry, right? At one point, a few years ago, one of the ministers said, Indonesia is the highest use of BlackBerry. Why isn't BlackBerry manufacturing their handphones, their handsets in Indonesia, right? And that debate continued into the new government, and they did actually come up with a decree between 3 ministers to say domestic content of handphone has to go up from, I think it's 40% to whatever by a certain year. And then they found that you really can't do that because and make a cost-effective handphone because you don't have the scale that China or Taiwan has in the particular part of the components of the handphone. So if I'm not mistaken, the Minister of Communication and Information, he's recognized this because he comes from that world. So he's expanded the definition of local content to include the software, the apps, the design components that goes into a handset, right? And that allows, I don't think that's something that actually Indonesia does have competitive advantage. If you look at because Indonesia is a handphone user, and a lot of apps are being developed in Indonesia. And it starts being developed for the Indonesian market, and then it gets produced elsewhere. And I know that a lot of the testing of handphone, all the stuff that goes in the handphone, and you have to test it to see whether there are bugs and so on, that's also being done in Indonesia. So that's, I think, another approach, maybe a more acceptable approach rather than saying, well, if you're gonna impose local content, it's difficult for us to expand, even though part of that is true.
Next, we've got a lot of hands up, so we might start taking batches of 3 questions. So, Frank, and yes, there, and anyone over this side? Yes, Peter. Okay. So starting with
Ibu Mali, a big reason for the challenges that you described is the slowdown in Chinese growth and the changing nature of Chinese growth in the end of the resources boom. Now, Indonesia is not the only country that's in that situation of needing to deal with that, and increasing productivity, changing the nature of domestic sources of growth. Australia is among them. Some would argue that Australia is not terribly well prepared for that transition. Do you see any role and opportunity for international, regional, perhaps collaboration on these issues? Or are the nature of the problems in individual countries, Indonesia and Australia in particular, too different for them?
Mari, I want to disagree on one subject, is that you use China as a benchmark. You keep saying that you need to look at China, because I think that China development path is a bit dangerous, right? We've seen that it is at the cost of environment. We've seen this documentary on the dome in China. It's at the cost of redistribution, yeah? Because there is a forced regulation in China that doesn't allow people to move freely from rural area to urban area. It's also at the cost of human rights of the ethnic and religious minorities in China. Right? And then there are lots of other things, but also with that kind of path of development, China become a more oppressive society. So I think we need to requalify the way we look at China development, because we don't want Indonesia to end up being like that kind of society. Thank you.
last one, Peter.
Petroleum product subsidies, Murray. At the moment, international petroleum prices are down and have been down for a while, but the history of that price is that they're unpredictable, uncontrollable, just like the lighting in this room. Following a similar pattern, I suppose. So, eventually, international petroleum prices are going to rise. When that happens, will it be possible to resist the temptation to waste public revenue subsidising petroleum prices?
Okay, I wasn't using China as a benchmark. I was using China more for the kind of the more restructuring in terms of the manufacturing and services and how they play out in the global value chain story. I wasn't going to go into the China as a model, development model. It's more that whatever China does has an impact on production and the rest of the world. And we need to pay attention to that. For instance, you look at the production network that developed in electronics. Actually, Indonesia is not part of that electronic global value chain or production network for various reasons, because Indonesia doesn't have that basis. It is for like white goods, like refrigerators or printers, but not for the handphones or the laptop. And in the next phase of the global value chain, if China does really get into the services part of it, it's going to be huge. And whatever China does is always huge. So we need to know where it's going and where we should be placing ourselves in terms of the competitiveness and the specialization that we could play a role, whether it's in the design part or whether it's in very detailed services work. You know, these are some of the skills that that Indonesia has. You know, there are a number of case studies, or at least in my knowledge, some of the things that you find surprising that in the production network that it gets done in Indonesia, where compared to elsewhere, is a lot to do with our our ability to be creative. Actually, the arts part of it is quite strong. I'll give you an example of what's that? The fine china that gets painted on Royal Doulton. Royal Dalton, the only factory they have outside of Ireland, which is owned by them, is in Indonesia. And the reason why they chose Indonesia after testing China, India, and so on, is that because they found that, because it's hand-painted ceramic, they found that they could train Indonesians in 6 months to do the same quality work as in Ireland. Yeah. And they're doing very well in Indonesia. And if you see it, next time you see a Royal Dalton piece, it was probably painted in Indonesia. So things like that where, you know, we need to find where is our advantage, where is our comparative and competitive advantage. And then we need to build up the talent and the human resources in that area. That's really what I meant. And that's why we need to watch what China does, because I think they are going to go into the services space in a big way. Yeah? You can see what they did with film. Whether successful or not unsuccessful, is yet to be seen. They're very good at kind of, acquiring rather than creating something new. So they bought AMC, Wanda Group has bought the theater chain, AMC. And they actually have local content for production in China. I don't know how they got away with their WTO commitment, but I think it's 50% or some percentage of Chinese screens that show films have to be Chinese films. But Chinese film can be interpreted as being produced together with a foreign company, but has to have enough Chinese content. So what happened is that a lot of the Warner Brothers and so on, they opened up studios in China. Okay, so they are trying to, and you can think about it. China has a lot of cinemas. I think there's like 2,000 cinemas being opened a day or something like that. Some incredible number, right? Indonesia doesn't even have 2,000 cinema for the whole of Indonesia. So the demand is just huge, right? So therefore, whatever they do, services, when they enter into something, it's going to be huge, and we have to pay attention to it. What was the other one? Slow down, your question, sorry, on slowdown in China and how we can have regional cooperation in Australia and Indonesia. I think what countries, commodity producing countries such as Australia and Indonesia, they have found that they have to diversify. And maybe some of the things that you used to do, which is related to mining, the technology or the services that you have developed in those sectors, you can redirect it to another sector, right? Or the knowledge that you have. Just trying to think of an example. I read an example of mining where they have to actually take the water out of the land or something like that, and that same technology can actually be applied in agriculture and other things. So, and that's where if there's a need, maybe this can be something that can be developed between countries. I mean, an example that was actually brought to my attention in a discussion yesterday was the food chain. Something like cattle, which is beef and cattle, which is obviously a very strong comparative advantage of Australia, and it is something that Indonesia needs. And if you kind of take away the issue of import and export of cattle and how you have to have the abattoirs meet the standard, if you take that away and you look at it as a food value chain from end to end, including the retail, and China does need a lot of cattle and beef, is there a way where Australian investment in Indonesia related to cattle production, which is meeting the needs of Indonesia, but can also meet the needs of the region, be a possible cooperation that we can leverage on, you know? And it's a complementarity of the natural resources as well as the know-how, you know, and the demand, and there being a market. That's one possibility. I think despite the slowdown in China and their fall in demand for commodities, everybody's going to need food. Yeah, and everybody wants quality food, secured supply chain for food. That's really the big thing, and I believe that's something that could be an area of cooperation. Petroleum subsidies. I didn't put it up, but that was actually one of the macro issues that's currently a bit worrying, because they did remove the fuel subsidy in November last year, and the idea was that then for the prices to move with world prices. But what happened was it's now being adjusted every 3 months. 6 months. 6 months. Oh, that's right. They were supposed to adjust it just recently, and then they decided not to adjust it. So it hasn't been adjusted for 6 months. And they even talk about the creation of a fund to deal with the volatility. You know, so which I think is probably, given that this is probably really the right time to link it to world prices when the world price is low and people start getting used to prices going up and down. And you know, we are probably I think we're the last country in ASEAN not to link it to world prices. I would hope that there is enough political will to really make that happen. There are kind of different reasons why they didn't raise it for this time. I was told that they didn't raise it enough in March, and so Pertamina has suffered some losses, so that's why they're not lowering it now to allow Pertamina to recoup. Let's hope that once that's that account is settled, that they will slowly begin to migrate to linking it to world prices. I think it just makes sense, you know, and people will get used to it. Right now, they were worried, I think, also in March about food prices. At that time, we had high food prices, so they were worried about inflation as well. But you know, one would hope that sense will prevail and it will happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Okay, this will be our last round of questions. So again, 3 questions, and if you could keep your questions or comments fairly brief, thank you. Yes, up the back. Yes, you. And one more. Yes, Rihanna. Okay.
So on the notion of on reducing costs, you took the example of a study on labor-intensive industry. If you could take a comparison on capital-intensive industries, the research I'm looking at is on vaccine industry.
Just a little louder if you can.
So my PhD research is on vaccine industry in middle-income countries, which is a very capital-intensive sector. It's highly regulated, and so though reducing production costs would be ideal, the strategy has been mainly known to try to seek large markets, create niche markets, and then try to find international certifications to exist to be competitive. So I'm wondering if you take, and this has also been what multinationals have tried to, in order to be competitive in such an industry. And so my question is, like, if we take the analogy of selling, making pies, instead of trying to make the pie cheaper, could we not try to see how to sell more? And I guess the question is, do you see that the government, or is there enough policies in place to balance such a strategy?
Next at the back.
Do you think Widodo's administration is able to solve problems that you discussed about?
Could you just repeat the last part?
My question is about what you think about Jokowi's administration. Whether Jokowi, whether you are hopeful that Jokowi will be able to address some of these issues.
Simple question to close the session. So this morning there is this discussion about how government of Kenya prefer to have a brain drain rather than having their youth come back to Kenya to develop their country, because they afraid to have this burden of, you know, in the Kenya government, you know, like unemployment, etc. So my question will be, what have Indonesian government done to overcome the brain drain, or how Indonesian government encourage the youth to, you know, to come back and develop Indonesia, as you mentioned about the importance of human capital?
Okay. The first question, production costs. I think if you take pharmaceutical, the way they try to make profit is actually from the royalty, right? From the IPR, and whether or not they can, if they want to sell more, then they need to either reduce the IPR cost, or I think what Indonesia has been trying to do is produce this generic medicines where there's no brand, even though you are using some of this IPR. So that's part of the program. And I think the other part of what I've been hearing on the pharmaceuticals is the import substitution story again, but maybe in this case, because we import most of the components used to make the medicine, and it's actually something with the size of our market and availability of, once you talk about biomedicine, Indonesia has a lot of biodiversity resources that can actually be tapped, and if they could make the right conducive environment for that, I think we can actually make our own, produce a lot of it in Indonesia. So I think it's a combination of IPR, making sure the incentives are right for producing locally, not force it, but make it locally. And the way the universal healthcare is going to play out as generic medicine and even supplies to all the puskesmas on all the medical equipment, it's actually a very huge market. If they can get it right, they can actually make that a win-win where there's a need for the universal healthcare, but you can use that as a captive to create the domestic production, because the scale is definitely there. At the moment, though, unfortunately, a lot of the inputs are imported. But I understand Badan POM and Board of Investment are talking about how to, in this case, maybe we have to look carefully what they mean by import substitution of the local content. Am I hopeful about the new administration? I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. In the sense that I think if you look at what they've tried to do, like all those policies, domestic content and so on, I think they will find, they have found in some cases that it's not easy to do it in today's world, whether it's because you are hitting against some international commitment, or you can't implement it in the practical sense, or even if you have this policy, the investment or the production that you hope just doesn't come because it's not attractive for the business people. And at the end of the day, I think President Jokowi is practical and pragmatic. So you have to, I think, be able to explain it. Whoever has the ability to channel this input. That there are some things you may want to do in the interest of nationalism or whatever, but you got to understand that it has a cost, and are you prepared to have the cost? And maybe for one or two policies you can do it, but for the rest there are other ways you can achieve national benefit. And in a way you have to be able to tell the political story, and it always ends up saying, okay, we're going to create jobs, whatever the policy, we're going to create jobs, we're going to reduce poverty. You've got to be able to distill it and condense it in that regard. And I think this is just policy reform 101. You need to have some quick wins. I think we have to all put our heads together on this. What are some quick wins that can prove the case for better policy as compared to ad hoc policies? I think this is a challenge. I don't know whose challenge it is, but certainly that's something we do think about. What are some of the quick wins? And I think, like in the budget, I think some of the quick wins would be to get fuel prices right, and then that allows you room actually to have maybe a kind of affirmative / keberpihakan keberpihakan, ya, affirmative policies and spending, whether it's at the village level, micro enterprises, health, education, but you've got to make sure that all these policies are going to be implemented, as much as possible to the target, the delivery mechanism. I think the village law is going to open up a lot of challenges. I think they should do pilot first, if they could, and so on, but it has the potential, if they got it right, to be very powerful. Brain drain rather than burden. I think it depends what level of human resources we're talking about, because Indonesia already exports workers from low-end, semi-skilled, also to professional level. Yeah. And part of the lower end is because the feeling is that there's not enough jobs at home. For the higher skill, it's a question of jobs as well as opportunity, maybe, not just unavailability of jobs. So I think for each level, you have to have a different strategy. I think there is some concern about the lower end, the lower skill end. A part of that is, I think, the need to be able to train the workers, no matter what end, maybe up to the semi-skilled, so that they can be certified. There's a big wage differential between Indonesian maids compared to Filipino maids. And that's because the Philippine government, I think, does advocate a lot for making sure that the rights of the workers and so on are protected. And I think for the professional up, we have a shortage of engineers, but yet we know there are engineers working overseas. Is it a salary issue? Is it an opportunity issue? Is it a career path issue? I think we have to look into this more carefully. And as you know, 2 or 3 years ago, I don't know whether you all are some of you are part of this diaspora initiative. Part of the diaspora initiative is to try to understand how we can attract back a lot of the Indonesian talent who are out there, to come back. And part of it, one of the important components is visa. For an Indonesian who's lived abroad or even become a citizen of another country or a permanent resident of another country, to be able to come back to Indonesia and live in Indonesia without any problem and be given an incentive in that way. That's actually one of the policy issues that the diaspora are fighting for. The final thing I would say is that when you think about talent and going offshore, think about it as you can do offshore work but stay in Indonesia. Just like all the examples that I gave. The kampung outside of Magelang, they can reach the world. They don't even speak English. They can still reach the world with Google Translate. They can't communicate in English, but they can use all the technology and the tools are there to reach the world from a village in Magelang. And I believe this is kind of one of the answers for job creation, where you can still stay at home, but you can do a lot of offshoring. And you find a lot of examples also with the online possibility of online sales and marketing. A lot of entrepreneurs stay at home and do their work at home, and then they sell things online, whether it's services or whether it's goods. So I think understanding that space and having the capacity building and having the connectivity will be important. The component that is still going to be a problem is the payment system. Once they get that in place, that's going to just explode.
I think that's all that we have time for, and indeed I'm getting sick of pressing that like button there. Thank you, Ibu Mari, for your forbearance with our lighting problems, but particularly thank you for your presentation, your question and answers. We've been for many years used to hearing you speaking about economic and trade issues, and I know you've said on other occasions that when you were Minister of Creative Industries, Creative Economy, how rewarding you found that. And it's been particularly interesting to hear you speaking about some of the new technology, some of the more innovative things that are going on in Indonesia. And so we're very grateful to you, and we're very grateful to you coming to ANU to mark the 50th anniversary of the Indonesia project, and we look forward to seeing you again in some of the other events over the next few days. So join me in thanking